In the stifling dark of a medieval mine, sparks scattered each time iron hammers struck the rock, their echoes rolling like thunder through chambers carved deep beneath the earth. There were no engines, no drills, no machines to ease the burden, only human strength, crude tools, and hands hardened by endless toil. Yet from these depths, men pried out veins of silver and gold, metals powerful enough to crown monarchs, finance wars, and uphold empires. But how was it done? How did labourers armed with nothing but fire, water, and grit wrest treasure from the unyielding heart of stone? To understand, one must first recognise that silver and gold were far more than metals in the Middle Ages. Silver was the bloodline of kingdoms, the foundation of coinage, stabilising fragile economies and sustaining armies. Gold, rarer and more radiant, bore a heavier symbolic weight. It crowned kings, embellished sacred relics, and embodied divine sanction. Across Europe, as mining towns like Freiburg in Saxony or Kutna Hora in Bohemia flourished, landscapes were reshaped and entire regions transformed. These mines did not simply feed treasuries, they became magnets for merchants, craftsmen and labourers, birthing bustling centres of commerce and culture. The work was tightly controlled. Monarchs imposed heavy taxes, declared royal ownership of mineral wealth, and granted mining rights only through charters. Guilds watched over wages and regulated skill, ensuring knowledge passed through generations. As Europe shifted from barter to cash economies, the demand for coinage surged. The silver from mines minted countless pennies and groschen. The gold adorned chalices and crowns, feeding the ambitions of rulers. Yet behind this grandeur lay the grim realities of labour. Miners descended into narrow, choking shafts, equipped with nothing more than primitive tools. Every fragment of ore they hauled up was bought with sweat, lungs filled with dust, and the constant threat of collapse. For kings and bishops, mines were lifelines of wealth. For the miners, they were tombs that breathed death with every creak of timber. The tools of their trade were modest, yet indispensable. Iron picks, chisels, crowbars and hammers, sharpened daily at the blacksmith's forge, were all that stood between men and unyielding rock. Every dull edge wasted strength, so sharpening was a ritual as important as prayer. Wooden buckets creaked under weight as they were dragged upward by rope pulleys, often from depth so great the bottom seemed an abyss. Oil lamps and tallow candles gave feeble light, their smoke blackening the walls and choking the air. These humble instruments, iron, wood and flame, opened the gates of Europe's underground wealth. Each strike of a hammer was more than noise. It was the steady pulse that beat coins into circulation, that adorned kings with crowns, that upheld the fragile balance of medieval power. Among the most ingenious techniques was fire setting. When stone proved too hard for even sharpened iron, miners turned to flame. They stacked wood tight against the rock and set it alight, letting heat bake the surface for hours. Then came the shock. Water poured onto the glowing wall, cracking and weakening the stone with violent suddenness. Only then could picks and hammers chip away what fire had softened. This method was costly and perilous. Smoke filled tunnels until breathing became torture, and the searing heat forced men back until the stone cooled. Vast forest fell to feed the flames, reshaping landscapes around mining towns. Yet fire setting opened paths otherwise impossible, allowing access to veins that powered kingdoms. In the flicker of the flames, miners saw not just burning wood, but the walls of wealth collapsing before them. Life underground was survival itself. The darkness was near absolute, broken only by trembling flames that cast more shadow than light. Collapses came without warning, burying men alive. Air was the greater enemy. Deeper tunnels meant stale, poisoned breaths, smoke, dust, and invisible gases. Without modern ventilation, miners carved crude chimneys or used bellows to force air downward. But these were poor defences. Men fainted, suffocated, or staggered back to the surface coughing black soot. Every breath was a gamble, and yet the work never stopped. Above ground, crowns and chalices gleamed. Below, men wagered their lungs and lives for the sake of kingdoms. But even once, or reached the surface, the true struggle had only begun. Silver and gold never appeared ready for the mint. They lay trapped in the mountains of stone. Crushing was the first task. Heavy hammers reduced rock to fragments, or it was ground in mills of stone until it yielded finer grains. Water became a patient partner in this process. Streams and troughs washed away lighter debris, leaving heavier flecks of metal behind in a crude yet effective form of gravity separation. Wooden sieves and sluices sorted fragments, while endless hands sifted, pounded and rinsed. Women and children often played roles here, their smaller fingers adept at sorting through gravel and dust. It was a world of noise and repetition, yet every grain of silver or gold that gleamed at the bottom of a pan was a victory. Grain by grain, the wealth of Europe was born. Once freed from stone, or faced its final trial, the furnace. Here, medieval metallurgy blurred the lines between art and science. Charcoal burned hot, bellows driven by hand forcing flames to searing heat. Ore was placed in crucibles or stone hearths, the fire licking it into molten streams. Salt, lead, or mercury were sometimes added to bind impurities, crude yet effective chemistry long before laboratories existed. In cupellation, lead swallowed impurities, leaving silver behind. In amalgamation, mercury drew gold out at the cost of toxic fumes. Smelters judged heat not with thermometers, but with eyes trained to flames' colours and metal's glow. The roar of fire, the hiss of molten droplets, and the acrid smoke marked the moment of transformation. From dull rock to shimmering metal, miners' toil found its purpose. When molten silver dripped like moonlight, or gold poured like liquid sun, the ambitions of kings were secured. The life of a miner, however, was rarely gilded. Few were full-time professionals. Most were peasants who turned to the shafts when fields could not feed their families. Wages were meagre, often paid not in coin but in food, shelter, or the promise of a share in ore. For every handful of silver pulled from stone, the risks were unrelenting. Shafts collapsed without warning. Water flooded tunnels in minutes. Invisible pockets of deadly gas suffocated men before they could cry out. Injuries from falling rock or heavy tools crippled many. Few miners lived to old age. Yet in these fragile communities a culture emerged. Taverns, churches and markets grew around the mines, bringing a semblance of normalcy. Brotherhoods and guilds bound men together, offering spiritual protection and funeral rites for those lost below. Before descending each day, miners often prayed to St. Barbara, their patron saint, seeking protection from the earth's unpredictable rage. For their families, mining was both blessing and curse, a steady if harsh income, bought with shortened lifespans and endless danger. For rulers, mines were veins of fortune. For miners, they were reminders of mortality. And yet without their sacrifice, Europe's crowns would have remained bare, its treasuries hollow. Today, mining appears transformed. Towering machines rip through mountains with ease. Chemical refinement extracts metals at industrial scale. Helmets, masks, and reinforced shafts offer protections medieval men could scarcely imagine. Ventilation systems pump clean air deep into tunnels, and yet, even now, mining is counted among the world's most dangerous trades. Accidents still claim lives, and the earth, once disturbed, bears scars. Deforestation, poisoned waters, landscapes hollowed into vast craters. Compared with the Middle Ages, the difference is stark, but the continuity is striking. The same human determination to wrest wealth from stone, the same sacrifices written into history. Medieval miners had only fire, water, and iron, yet they supplied enough silver to mint coinage for entire continents, and enough gold to crown rulers for centuries. Their methods may appear primitive beside modern industry, but their ingenuity laid the foundation for every advancement since. To reflect on their struggle is to see progress differently. Machines may now dwarf the picks and torches of the past, but they are merely extensions of the will and endurance that guided men in the dark. Without their experiments, fire setting, gravity washing, primitive smelting, the modern mine would not exist. Progress is never born whole. It is carved generation by generation, strike by strike, in sweat and sacrifice. Silver and gold for medieval rulers were never mere commodities. Silver coins stabilized kingdoms and bound distant markets into shared economies. Merchants trusted the glint of pennies minted in England, or groschen from Bohemia, building networks of trade across seas. Gold, rarer, more dazzling, was not simply wealth, it was legitimacy. Crowns, chalices, and relics glittered in courts and cathedrals, binding rulers to heaven in the eyes of their subjects. To hold gold was to command both earthly power and divine recognition. This hunger for precious metals stoked conflict. Regions rich in ore became contested ground. Wars were fought not only for land, but for the veins beneath it. Revenues from mines filled treasuries, paid for fortresses, armies, and monuments. Yet, while kings displayed their wealth, the miners who had clawed it from the ground rarely tasted its rewards. Their lives were the invisible currency that financed ambition. The legacy of their labour is still etched into Europe's landscapes. Abandoned shafts and ruined smelters lie in forests and hillsides, silent testimonies to centuries of toil. Ghost towns remain in Saxony, Bohemia, and Spain. Once thriving communities now reclaimed by silence. Some, like Kutna Hora, survive as heritage sites, their tunnels preserved for visitors to walk the paths once trodden by miners. But the truest legacy is not found in ruins. It endures in systems shaped by silver and gold, the shift to money economies, the rise of banking, the glitter of chalices in Gothic cathedrals, the treasures locked in royal vaults. Even now, coins hammered centuries ago remain in collections and treasuries, proof that the labour of nameless miners still circulates in the fabric of history. And beyond wealth lies testimony to the endurance of men who entered darkness with faith and fire, to the ingenuity that found light in primitive tools, to the sacrifices that underpin the grandeur of crowns and altars, stand today at the mouth of an abandoned shaft, and silence reigns where once the clang of iron echoed. Yet if one listens closely, it is not hard to imagine the sounds of labour, the strike of hammer, the creak of rope, the roar of fire, and in that echo lies the truth. Before machines, before industry, it was human endurance that carved wealth from stone. The gleam of silver and gold that adorned kings and saints was born in darkness, paid for by hands and lungs of those long forgotten.